Hey, greetings, boys and ghouls. We are out here with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last one, we continued this kind of yo-yoing between Kalikos in what will be for our timeline the future, in after the events of Cataclysm, and way back into prehistory in the time of Galakrond. And we saw the most notable event, I would say, would be that you saw how Neltharion does make himself into a friend, a brother, a partner to Malygos and the others. And there was always that closer friendship between Malygos and Neltharion. Just there's a sisterhood between Ysera, a literal one, and Alexstrasza, and we haven't really talked much about Nosdormu yet. So let's stay a while and wrap up and listen as we wrap up the first part with Chapter 5, which is called Galakrond. He might be in this one. Who knows? The blue dragon exhaled ferociously at the artifact, enveloping it in bitter frost. He brought down one heavy paw on the now glistening relic. Where good steel, turned brittle by the magical chill, would have easily shattered, Calix's odd nemesis retained every aspect of its essence, leaving the dragon with a very pained appendage. "You will not be my master," the blue roared, not caring if anyone heard the echo of his voice. "Curse someone else, you fiendish toy!" The octagonal relic glowed brighter yet. Expecting the worst, Calic immediately pulled back. Nothing happened. Calic ran a paw over the piece, but still the artifact did nothing. Even then, the blue could not help feeling that with each passing second, the mysterious object insinuated itself deeper and deeper into not only the dragon's mind, but also any soul one of his kind might have. Seizing up the relic, Calic prepared to throw it deep into the valley. However, as he raised his arm, the limb ached terribly. Indeed, only now did the blue feel the stress and strain all over his body. Calic felt as if he had flown halfway around the world. Flown. Testing his wings, Calic found that they too moved with pain. The Leviathan's anger kindled anew. It had been his own magic and muscle that had dragged him all the way to this land. He could only imagine how he had made the journey. Had he flown unconscious all that time? "It does not matter," Calic forcefully reminded himself. "All that matters is to free myself from its foulness." Well, maybe Alexstrasza noticed something was up. And that will, trigger her to start helping, because they're all being pretty just down in the dumps and bummed about it. But how could he do that? But how he could do that remained a question unanswerable. Rather than cast the artifact away again, Calic pressed it tight to his chest, then leapt into the air. No sooner had he done so than Calic abruptly veered north. As if by some miracle, he felt as if he suddenly knew how to divest himself of the monstrous relic. With great sweeps of his wings, the blue dragon headed to the very place from which he had dug out the artifact, the frozen bones of Galakrond. Fighting his exhaustion, Calic continued his hard pace and managed to reach the dragon blight as dark approached. The wastes and the dragon graveyard came into view soon after. Calic spotted the outline of the temple, then adjusted his path accordingly. Even in the gloom, the ancient behemoth's skeleton was somehow visible, where the remains of the hundreds of other dragons who had passed on during the many successive millennia were now no more than dark mounds. Calic landed in silence, feeling suddenly as if he disturbed their rest. Still, now that he had come this far, the blue had no intention of turning back. Recalling where he had dug up the relic, Calic transformed, then created a faint golden globe to light his path. Now holding the artifact in the crook of his left arm, the false half-elf closed on the towering skeleton. The wind tore through the graveyard, and the icy ground crunched under his boots. A long, lingering moan sent a chill of a different type down his spine. He paused, the floating globe moving by his will in the direction of the terrible cry. Seeing nothing, Calic took a step toward the sound. After a moment, he finally realized that the moan was the wind blowing through the eye socket of the gargantuan creature's skull. A new shiver ran through Calic as he recalled his vision of the living Galakrond. That such a being had lived, a proto-dragon that dwarfed dragons, filled him with awe. Galakrond was legend, but to see the legend living. But then disturbing thoughts arose. Calic wondered what place Galakrond had in this madness. The one vision appeared to have focused on him. Calic vowed that once he had finished with the foul thing resting in his arm, he would still try to find out more from one of his former counterparts. The blue had little else to do anymore. Seeing the area from a much lower perspective, Kalik noticed things that he had not before. In the glow, he noted footprints. It had never occurred to him that this sacred place had been visited by other creatures. Some of the prints were large, although not as large as those of dragons. The round, blunt shape indicated the presence of Magnetar, huge, savage hunters whose lower half resembled the body of a woolly mammoth, while the upper torso was like some bestial version of a night elf or a human with giant tusks. Why the Magnetar had been hunting in the wastes was a question that was not satisfactorily answered by the smaller, hooved tracks Kalik noted. At least 2 of the bison like Tonka had also been through the area, which was situated fairly far from their home territory. The Tonka were also more civilized than Magnetar and had a great respect for the dead, which made their being here more curious. Something long and thin lay at the edge of the globe's illumination. Directing the globe closer, Kalik saw that it was a Magnetar spear. The tip, partially visible, was stained with blood, and the blue noticed that some of the ice close to the point was dark. The Magnetar had brought down its prey, but there was no sign of the body. Kalik supposed that the beasts had taken away the unfortunate Tonka's corpse for food. With disgust, Kalik turned back to the ribcage. He stepped up to the nearest of the high arcing bones, and after a hesitation, stepped within the father of dragons. The moment he did, Kalik sensed that he was not alone. He quickly sent the globe forward. A thickly furred female Tonka stood under the arch of another rib. She leaned on a primitive spear made of some long bone and tipped with a rock-honed sharp. "Hail to you, dragon," the white bison-headed hunter rumbled as she bowed. She was clad in simple leather garments which she had no doubt fashioned from her own kills. "I am Bunik. I did not mean any sacrilege here." That she had seen him transformed despite the darkness did not surprise Kalik. In a land where it was often as dark as night, even in the day, a good Tonka hunter had to have fair night vision. "I have no quarrel with you, Bunik," the blue returned. He kept the artifact as well hidden by his arm as possible, even subtly shifting the glowing orb so that it slightly blinded the Tonka. She raised her other hand to shield her eyes. "Nor I with you. My kind do not come here often, but I was in search of a relic from this place to bring back, and thus prove myself worthy of him who loves me." Kalik held his surprise at her reason for being here, but assumed she could not possibly be hunting what he carried. Growing impatient to finish burying the foul thing, he curtly replied, "I will not stop you from going on with your search, then." "This ground is as sacred to us as it is to you," the Tonka went on as if not hearing him. "The Magnetar, they care nothing about anything. They seek only to fill their stomachs." Lowering her hand, Bunik took a step toward him. "But for as long as there have been Tonka, we have respected the resting place of the Great Ones." "And I am pleased to hear that, but—" She set the butt of the spear on the ground again, right next to the very hole to which Kalik was heading. "A world without dragons? That would be a strange place. Not so good. There would be no harmony. The world is hard enough to survive. The world needs dragons." Kalik chose not to comment on the adverse effect Deathwing and Malygos had had on Azeroth. Instead, he sought some other way in which to hint to the overly talkative Tonka that she should depart. Suddenly he noticed that Bunik was no longer standing before him. Kalik spun and discovered her near the rib by which he had just passed. The blue could not recall her walking past him, but Bunik, her back now to him, clearly must have. The sphere illuminated several of her steps in the chilling ground. As if sensing him watching, she looked back. The Tonka's large brown eyes focused not on Kalik, but rather on the crook of his arm. "Some things should not remain buried," Bunik quietly commented. "Fare you well, great dragon." Somehow Kalik's hold on the relic slipped. Looking down, he seized it before it could fall free. Straightening again, he demanded, "What do you mean by—" But Bunik was nowhere in view. Directing the sphere toward where he had last seen her, Kalik could not even find any trace of the tracks he had seen a moment ago. The blue stepped back. He refused to think that the Tonka had been some figment of his imagination. What he suspected was that the foul artifact had once more toyed with him. Kalik focused on reburying the relic and leaving its madness behind. He started to set it back into the hole. Then, in the light of the sphere, he noticed something where Bunik had momentarily set her sphere. A hand. The blue swore. Despite where it lay, the hand was almost entirely intact, and though it was of similar appearance, the lost appendage was clearly larger than that of a human or a dwarf. It had a peculiar gray coloring that also unsettled Kalak. However, after a closer study, what he had thought flesh proved to be the remnants of a glove. How he had missed the hand last time, Kalak discovered quickly. A chunk of frosty ground had covered it until Bunik's spear had loosened the dirt. The blue glanced over his shoulder, almost certain that she would be standing there, but of the Tonka there remained no sign. Despite the grisly find, Kalak nearly dismissed it until he saw that there was something else caught in the palm. It was small, round, and at first appeared to be glass. However, when Kalak dared touch it, he felt an odd warmth. The octagonal artifact began to glow blue. Blue, not lavender. With an even stronger epithet, Kalak stumbled back. What this meant now, he did not know. The relic fell from his arm, landing atop the gloved hand. The world flashed blindingly bright. "This is not true," said a voice Kalak recognized as young Ysera's. "They are wrong." "He is not very smart," Malagos's voice returned, "but smart enough." Suddenly Kalak could see again, and what he saw was another shriveled proto-dragon corpse. This one had once been ivory, but now looked dusty white. Like the previous one, the face was contorted as if the death had been agonizing. Malagos's gaze swept past Ysera and a briefly viewed fire-orange figure that Kalak assumed was her sister to another location a little farther off. There, a second corpse lay sprawled. This one still retained some of the icy blue coloring that marked it as one of Malagos's own. And apparently a proto-dragon Malagos knew. Various emotions played out, including those attached to memories of younger days. A name, Taris, came to Kalak's mind. As juveniles, Malagos and Taris had hunted together while learning the proper tactics. Kalak noticed that he felt his host's emotions more clearly than ever. There was some change in the vision, some new vividness, as if Kalak were now even more a part of it than ever. It was not a thought that under the current circumstances comforted him. Malagos's thoughts came as both words and images. There were tales being told, unthinkable tales. Malagos did not know what to make of them. Ysera thought them false, while Alexstrasza believed that they should at least be considered. Galakrond had supposedly slain these and at least a dozen others. The source of this discovery huddled next to Alexstrasza, somehow managing to look smaller than Ysera, despite that not being the case. Purple in color, he looked half dead himself. "Swallow them up! Swallow them up!" he repeated over and over. "These are not swallowed," Ysera pointed out, still showing her disbelief. "Galakrond not like them." "Swallow them up!" Ysera scowled. The purple cowered more. Her tone reassuring, Alexstrasza murmured something in his ear. The scowl's focus shifted to Ysera's sister, but Alexstrasza pointedly ignored it. From his host, Kalak understood that the sisters had come across the shell of a proto-dragon, and after listening to what Malagos secretly half-considered babbling from the purple, had gone in search of the icy blue male. Malagos did not know exactly why they had decided to come to him, save that he was very clever. Trying to find a way to continue to be clever to them, he eyed the corpses. "More around?" "More, yes, more." The purple male glanced nervously to the west, to where the land first rose to a high ridge, then dropped some distance. The party had come from the east, and so had had only a glancing view of that direction. Malagos had been to the area before. The hunting for grazers was excellent here during the spring, and remembered only that there was a river below, knowledge that certainly was irrelevant to the moment. Not sure what he expected to find, Malagos headed in that direction. Kalak was also curious and glad that his mind and that of the proto-dragon seemed so in sync. Kalak observed everything that passed his host's gaze, and suddenly noticed some marks in the dirt that looked as if a creature the size of Malagos had dragged itself toward the ridge. His host did not see what he did, at least not at first. Only when he had just reached the top of the ridge did Malagos abruptly turn and eye the trail with interest. He leaned over the tracks, sniffing them. A peculiar stench, yet one not all that unfamiliar to either, filled his nostrils. On the other side of the ridge, rocks clattered. Malagos whirled. A dreadful vision that Kalak had experienced in the Nexus rose up over the ridge to attack his host. The rotting flesh, the sunken white eyes, even having seen the fiend before, did not keep Kalak from wanting to pull back. But Malagos threw himself toward the monstrosity, exhaling at the same time. His frosty breath enveloped the undead proto-dragon, freezing it, but for only a second. Barely slowing, the shriveled corpse shook off the frost and continued its attack. The stench of decomposing meat sickened both Kalik and his host as they collided with the ghoulish creature. Yellowed fangs sought Malagos' throat, claws toward his chest. Up close, the undead proto-dragon's countenance was even more awful, much of the skin having at some point been scorched. The scorched areas, more sensitive to decay, had crumbled inward in many places, giving Malagos and Kalik a view of the bloody, ruined interior of their foe's head. As Malagos inhaled for a second attempt, the undead startled him by doing just the opposite. A putrid green cloud covered Malagos' head, filling his mouth and snout and burning into his eyes. Nausea overcame him, and as a result, also Kalik. To both it felt as if their insides were putrefying. Malagos weakened, falling to his front knees. A tremendous whooshing sound, followed by intense heat, jarred Kalik and his host to full consciousness again. Claws pulled Malagos back from the heat. His eyes cleared enough to give both a watery glimpse at what had happened. Alexstrasza stood before their ghoulish foe, exhaling more fire on the undead proto-dragon. The creature burned well, but still did not fall. It converged on the fire-orange female. "Let go!" Malagos commanded Ysera, who was the one who had pulled him to safety. She obeyed immediately, although still reeling from the undead's ghastly breath weapon. Malagos knew that he had to help Alexstrasza in turn. Malagos exhaled forcefully. It made his head swim, and even Kalik thought that they were about to black out. But somehow Malagos retained his sense of mind as his chilling breath joined the female's own strike. More brittle now due to the flames, the undead proto-dragon cracked and crumbled with the additional and opposing force turned on it. A wing already fragmented broke off, followed by one forelimb. The fiend pressed forward only to lose its tail and hind paw. The corpse collapsed, shattering as it hit hard ground. Alexstrasza looked in relief to Malagos, but Kalik's host had already spun around in Ysera's direction. Kalik at first thought Malagos had gone mad, but then sensed what concerned him. Malagos fluttered up into the air just long enough to pass over Ysera. Of the cowering proto-dragon there was no sign, and both Malagos and Kalik assumed that he had wisely fled. Still, he was not Malagos' target. That was the first corpse upon which they had come. The corpse that Kalik saw was beginning to move. The icy blue proto-dragon fell upon the stirring body. To Kalik's dismay, his host sank his teeth deep into the corpse's throat. Malagos ripped away flesh and bone with abandon, even as the body tried to shake free. With one last vicious tug, Malagos tore off the upper part of the neck. The head flailed, the jaws seeking the living proto-dragon's own throat. Malagos twisted around, then released his hold. The severed head spiraled through the air, then landed yards away. Its jaws clacked several times before the head finally lay still. The body quieted a moment later. Malagos shook the foul-tasting bits out of his mouth and turned toward the remaining corpse. But Alexstrasza and Ysera had already torn that one to shreds. "It did not move," Ysera said after shaking rotting flesh free. "We did not want it to." Malagos nodded, but then saw a troubling expression on Alexstrasza's face. She studied the landscape, then looked at the others. "More dead," he said. The fire-orange female reminded them. "Where are they?" There came a plaintive cry from far away, one that made the unseen Kalik think of the cowering proto-dragon. Malagos instantly turned, and Kalik found himself not only back in his own time, but once again a dragon. In addition, he was flying through the night sky, the artifact and the round glassy fragment both clutched tight. The second piece lay attached to the top of the octagonal artifact, revealing that both had been one from the beginning and had merely been separated by time and circumstance until now. Yet that did not bother the blue nearly as much as discovering his body acting on what he considered its own accord, or as if another mind controlled it. Kalik halted, hovering over the dark landscape. Some of the jagged mountains of Northrend on the edge of the Dragonblight, he belatedly noted, and trying to decide what he could do. One desperate hope quickly came to mind. If I can't bury it, maybe I could just let it shatter. Without hesitation, Kalik released his hold. The combined relics plummeted toward the hungry mountains. A sense of foreboding suddenly filled the blue. He dived after the relics. Far below, their illuminations swelled. Kalik roared in protest, even as he felt himself lose connection with the waking world to which he had only just returned. He had one last glimpse of the sharp, rocky land racing up at him before plunging into the darkness within again. For a single heartbeat, there was utter silence. Then the voices rose from the darkness. They quickly grew from whispers to a manic cacophony that threatened to deafen the blue. The voices turned into frantic cries. The world burst into focus again. Shrieking proto-dragons darted through the cloudy sky. A thundering roar shook the warmer but still mountainous region Kalik now found himself, or rather Malygos, in. Suddenly, something blotted out what light there was. Malygos looked up, and both Kalik and he beheld the underside of a titanic proto-dragon that could be none other than Galakrond. Kalik felt the fear that touched Malygos, but it was fear combined with a determination to live. Fear was no thing of shame, not when confronted by such a horrific threat. Malygos retained his focus, diving down toward a crevice just as Galakrond fell upon a silver-blue proto-dragon, too panicked to choose one direction over another fast enough to evade the much swifter behemoth. To Galik's horror, Galakrond swallowed the smaller proto-dragon whole. Only then did Kalik notice something even more disconcerting about the father of dragons. Galakrond's body seemed distended in odd places, especially his gullet. What has happened here? Why is he doing this? Kalik wondered. But there was no chance to seek an answer through Malygos, for just then something collided with Kalik's host. Unprepared, Malygos flapped wildly as he sought to regain control. Through his eyes, Kalik briefly noted Koros hovering near the area before Malygos' spinning took the sneering proto-dragon from view. The blue and white proto-dragon's fury infected Kalik as well, and as Malygos righted himself, Kalik looked forward to seeing his host deal with his rival. But before Malygos could act, a dread shadow enshrouded him. The proto-dragon looked up directly into the vast gullet of Galakrond. The jaws closed on Malygos and Kalik. I can't quite remember from Chronicles if Galakrond is undead already, how that happened, if that was from the old gods. Is he the one making them undead? Did he get made undead as part of it? I can't fully quite remember. So this will be a good refresher for that. And we finished the first part. All right, so nice little cliffhanger to end the first part with. And another episode is in the pipes, 5x5. I thank everybody so much for watching and listening. And I look forward to seeing you next time on Lore of Warcraft.